The words low battery appear right before your eyes. You take off your VR headset and realized your whole life was just a VR simulation which you've been playing for only a few minutes. How do you react? Going to the DMV. When I had been bullied constantly in 7th grade by 3 different kids/groups of kids and the school showed so little interest in helping me. I was physically bullied, verbally mocked, humiliated in front of the other kids, and not an eye was batted. When I finally took my mom's advice to make a scene the next time someone started throwing things at me, I did it. We were outside that day for PE, and while we were all sitting in lines at the start of class, a kid in the line next to me started throwing pebbles at me. I ignored it for a moment, then when he kept going I yelled at him to stop. I didn't care that people were staring, I wanted them to. I wanted them to see that this average height, able-bodied boy was throwing things at me, a very small and disabled girl. The teacher came over and asked what happened. Kid told him they were only pebbles, he wasn't hurting me. The teacher agreed with him and told me if I ever disrupted his class like that again I was getting detention. I don't know what it is about some teachers, but the second they get put in charge of more than one child they become absolutely blind to any kind of bullying, and if it gets pointed out to them, they think that particular incident exists in a vacuum and couldn't possibly be a sign of anything worse. I was 11 years old and suicidal because I felt so incredibly powerless. That teacher only solidified that feeling. I think this applies. My family rejected me, so then my closest friends become my family. You know, like friends are the family you choose. And now my family is surprised they're not included in my future plans at all, and I prioritize them less during holidays. I'm in the process of starting a fire now. My negligent and narcissistic mother has pushed me over the edge. In this latest episode, she came into town in October. I took 2 extra days off from work, and it's not easy to recover from being away from my job, and I dropped about $400 over the long weekend on food/entertainment. Come to find out, she's been bad-mouthing me to my sister and aunt about how I didn't let her stay longer, even though my mom never even directly asked to stay longer. She called me on the phone to tell me I made her cry. This, from a woman that didn't brush my hair growing up. I was heating up bread. For 1 minute. 50-second too long. I, F20, spent several months in a mental institution. I was a young teen when I was first admitted. The staff were extremely abusive to most patients, although certain ones were spared due to their meek behavior. One time, I was tricked into admitting to an infraction that I had never committed, and I was forced to stay in my room for several days on end. I attempted to file a complaint, but it never really went anywhere. The staff were typically very unkind, and they treated each patient as though they were a burden. I was very lonely, and I sank even deeper into depression. I kept my head down for several months until I was eventually released. As an adult, those months in the ward still haunt me. I struggle with feeling worthwhile, and I criticize myself for the smallest things because the hospital conditioned me into nitpicking and punishing myself for not being perfect. I have picked up the phone numerous times, trying to work up the courage to call the head of the hospital and give him a piece of my mind, but I've never been able to go through with it. Deleted. Probably my relationship with my dad. My step-cunt was always, well, a cunt, and I finally got the courage to tell him how I couldn't stand her and she was rude to me when he wasn't around, and I didn't want to go to his house anymore for fear of the bullying from her and her kids. He told me she wasn't leaving and I needed to get over it. We didn't talk much for 13 years. Fast forward to today and she has the audacity to tell people she has granddaughters, my kids, but for the sake of my mending relationship with my dad I don't go and set her straight, and tell her to fuck off. God, I hate that woman. Within a few months as a teenager I was arrested for selling drugs, went to jail and was put on probation. All the while my parents were having a nasty divorce and being kicked out of school not for drugs. I didn't grow up with the best family. There was a long period of time where there was constant fighting, and things often went too far. I didn't feel safe in many different ways. It all culminated to a point when I was 17, disowned, and about to get kicked out. But, my vindictive, defensive actions in the past made my mother know that kicking me out wasn't a good idea. I know the only reason I could have a roof over my head was because my mom isn't a citizen, and she knew I would have reported her for the crime of child abuse, which did happen, which would have put her residency in jeopardy. So, I guess I had to threaten to burn the village in order to feel the warmth of safety. Edit: a lot of people are assuming my mother is illegal, but she's not. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism through which she can stay in the United States, but she married my dad, American, and they got divorced. She can live and work here, but she doesn't have the full protection of the government like me. When I was a teenager living in rural Alabama, I did not get along with my stepmother. She went out of her way to be as mean as she could to me. Once when she left the house, she took the mouse for the family computer with her so I couldn't use it while she was gone. Well, I did her one better by taking a cord from the back, then locking myself in my bedroom until she got home. She uses my little baby stepsister against me and tells her to tell me she has a present for me. As soon as I unlocked the door, stepmother yanks it out of my hand and starts screaming at me about why the computer won't work. Well, let me tell you, on both sides of me I had a steel pole lying against the wall and a simple glass of water. I briefly entertained the notion of smashing her in the face with the pole, and instead just chucked the harmless water in her face. Woo, I'm quite sure I avoided jail that night. In grade school all of my classmates were either hostile, judgmental, uncaring, manipulative, or some combination of them. The teachers didn't even help, and some of them even tried to bully me into thinking I was stupid. I tried talking to older and younger classes sometimes, but that would only cause more bullying. My parents didn't help me either, their only advice was uselessly preaching about obedience and waiting. It's far in the past and doesn't really affect me anymore, but if I ever bear or adopt kids I'll try to give them the guidance which I received way too late. My dad's side of the family. After my mom divorced my dad when I was 7, I'd spend every other weekend at his house, like many divorced kids do, but I never felt really close to his family. My aunt was a ratchet bitch in her own right, ruined God knows how many family events, including my wedding, the bitch, and she was the kindest because she was the only one that acknowledged my existence. Once he passed, the shit hit the fan. All of a sudden my half-sister, she and I had the same dad, diff moms, was convinced that dad had money, and that I was screwing her out of it. Even after the probate judge reviewed all the paperwork and gave it a rubber stamp, she and his side of the family were convinced I was robbing them blind. I guess I didn't answer the question correctly, because as soon as his estate was closed, I cut those limbs off my family tree, doused them with gasoline, and tossed a match with glee. I see pictures from their annual family reunion every year on Facebook, and I say fuck 'em. My last year in the Navy, I stopped working and basically did the absolute lowest possible minimum, the most microscopic step above doing absolutely nothing. I left early to lunch and came back late as shit. Some days I showed up to morning muster late on purpose. I was a second class, E5, equivalent to a sergeant in the Marines/Army. The only thing I gave a shit about was training my juniors. I tried to give as much training as I could before I left. I didn't notify my watch coordinator that they took me off the watch bill, so I didn't stand a single watch in a year and a half. Deployment was fantastic without a watch. My chain of command didn't give a flying fuck if I went the extra mile because the shop was being run smoothly. No overdue jobs, we were all qualified, and a very tight team. They sure as fuck noticed when I stopped giving a shit. They took away my supervisor responsibilities and gave them to another second who was lower in rank to me by time in grade, and I basically became an overpaid E3. As if that was any kind of punishment. I was doing even less work. I had to sweep floors and clean the machines, lol. I'm not proud of the way my career ended. I admit I could have been much more mature about it, but I was in a really bad place mentally. I'm not an innocent victim, but I'm not the bad guy either. We lose a lot of good people in the military simply due to horrible toxic leadership. In my whole shop, only 2 people re-enlisted out of 12. I had a co-worker at a non-commission based retail job where a co-worker would repeatedly sabotage my sales so she could get a lot of credit apps and a high GSP, average hour sales. She would overhear my pitch for cards, required, and then lie to the customer so they would apply. I would have to try and rectify what she said while she hovered over me. She did many other questionable things, and I reported her multiple times, as did my co-workers and customers. Now, one time I got lucky and an 18-year kid came in to buy the most expensive desktop we have on display. 2.5K. She saw me do this sale, but I needed a manager to approve a tiny discount, but my radio was dead. Co-worker was watching me the entire time, so I asked if she'd call for the manager. She stone cold ignores me. I go for the she prints out paperwork on the computer and tries to sell it to him. When I return, she literally yells at me in front of the customer to give her the sale BC she worked too. I ignored her and didn't give her the sale. When I reported this, as did the customer, he was mortified. I was literally told by my boss ignore when she does that. She's a middle child, so she does stuff like that. I was tired of the stupid lack of action, so I filed an HR complaint regarding her, and 5 of my managers for not addressing it. They all got reamed for it. Only one is still in a management position, the rest were eventually demoted or laid off.